Thank you very much, everybody, for joining for our very first Hot Seat webinar, where I am going to be in the hot seat. I'm just going to do a couple of introductory slides just while we let people join us, and then we will start with a question. So, hello, if you've not met me before, I'm Suzie Robinson. I'm a consultant with ClearBox Consulting. I've been in the world of intranets and internal comms for over 18 years now, slowly creeping towards 20 years, and I'm not looking forward to the day where I say that. I was an award-winning internet manager back in the day. I was a practitioner back in the day. Now I look after project management and content strategy and those sorts of services. And I'm also responsible for the ClearBox review reports, which we are finishing off the 2026 one just now, and that will be due out in just a couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for that one. We'll let you know when it's ready. And please do come and find me on LinkedIn afterwards if you want to have a chat, and follow me and connect with me, because I like seeing all that stuff come up in my LinkedIn feed. Just a little bit about ClearBox Consulting. So we are a small specialist digital workplace and intranet consultancy. ClearBox itself has been around for about 19 years now, so it's been around for a while. We help organisations of different shapes and sizes with things like their intranet strategy, governance, adoption, community training as well, content training, and you can see just some of the people that we've worked with on the screen there, but really have been different shapes and sizes, so businesses of just a few hundred people all the way up to a few tens and hundreds of thousands as well. All of the consultants that work for ClearBox, there's only a few of us, we all have practical experience that we bring along with us. We work in a very transparent way, which is why we are called ClearBox. And importantly, we are vendor neutral. So we work well with lots of different vendors, but we have no formalised partnerships with them. We don't take any kickbacks or anything like that when we make any recommendations to clients. And so we get a really good broad view of the industry, which I'm going to bring along today. And also lastly, we are proudly employee owned. So we're employee owned trust, which was set up last year, which means that everybody who works for ClearBox all has a stake in the game and wanting to make ClearBox successful. So that's a little bit about me and about us. And I am joined and going to be grilled today by Lisa.
Hello. I can recognise a couple of faces there. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you. My name's Lisa Riemers. I'm an independent consultant who occasionally does some work for ClearBox. One of the things that I have been involved with over the last few years is being one of the independent reviewers for the Intranet and Employee Experience Platforms report, which I'm very excited to see the next edition coming out soon. I've also written a book about accessible communications with my co-author Matisse Hamill-Nealis. I'm a speaker, I'm a practitioner, I'm a consultant, and I help organisations improve the way they communicate. So I also used to be in-house. I've worked vendor side, I've worked for agencies, and I now tend to work either directly with clients or with partners to help people improve their digital employee experience. And I'm looking forward to grilling Suzie today.
Thank you very much. So we have a couple of themes of topics that we're going to talk about. We've got some questions that we've prepared. And in fact, we've had a couple of questions come through from people already, which we're going to prioritise and make sure that we fit in. So our plan is to roughly talk about some industry trends, roughly talk about some evergreen topics, but most importantly are your questions. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, just in case you've joined since I said it originally, there is the chat panel in Microsoft Teams at the top there. If you want to have a conversation, if you want to introduce yourself, say hello, that's fine, go ahead and use that. We'll probably largely ignore that bit, but we will focus on the Q&A panel, so you can find that at the top. It's roughly in the middle-ish, I think, of the screen as far as I can see it. So please do use that to ask questions. If you see a question that you really like, then upvote it so that it goes up the list if there are a few that come through, and we will absolutely prioritise those over the ones that we have prepared. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, because you don't want to just sit with a random slide on the chat. And it will be kind of over to me and Lisa to have a chat about the questions we've got. So I'm going to hand over to you, Lisa, to ask the first question.
Sure. Before we get into trends, Veronica has asked if there'll be a shared recording of the webinar. There will be one, won't there?
Yes, there will. Probably in the next day or two, we will send something over, and probably write up the notes from today as well.
Marvellous. Okay. So, first question, which I also put in the Q&A earlier to check that it was working for my own sanity. It's not quite out yet, but what do you think's the most interesting thing to come out of this year's 2026 ClearBox report, the Employee Experience and Intranet Platform report? What's the most interesting thing to have come out of that?
So I've been surprised by how much the vendors have developed their platforms over the last year. I think that's fair to say. So if you did get the 2025 edition, there's a lot of quite big shifts and changes over the last year. There's been a lot more focus again on internal communications features. And so vendors for a while now have understood the importance of internal comms and that functionality to the success of their platforms. Of course, AI continues, and I'm sure there may very well be some questions around that, but we've seen some AI functionality really progress forward and to bring some positive tools in there. There's some really beneficial ones on top of perhaps some of the kind of less day-to-day useful, or the more kind of familiar things that we're now used to around generative AI. But also we've got some platforms have come back to our report this year as well. So Lumaps has come back, WorkVivo has come back. We've got some reviews of some platforms that we've either not seen in depth before or never seen before. So Zoho has joined us this year. We've
Who are
also got
they?
Zoho. They're based in India, but they're a very big brand name. They're a little bit like Google and Microsoft and have a whole suite of tools. And they're one of those brands and kind of logos that you might recognize, but you don't necessarily know where from. They have
Okay.
their own intranet platform that then feeds into other stuff as well. And then platforms like Workeye, which we've reviewed for a few years, has now come out as a full review this year. They decided to take part and be investigated in more depth, and actually seeing the way that these platforms have progressed over time and now kind of delivering on all sorts of different things and different business needs has been really, really good to see and quite exciting to read through it. But I'm a big nerd, so I always like seeing that stuff anyway.
It's it's not a small task actually editing and reviewing that whole the report. I'd like to say that I've read it all and every page every year, but I always find myself referring back to it, and it's such a useful piece of work. Like it's one of those things where I can really see the value from when I was in house. I used to love it, and as someone who's reviewing what's in the market, like it's just unparalleled the amount of time that goes into it. Um, have there been any particular market changes or renamings this year that you can think of? Because I find that I struggle enough to remember brand names and vendor names, but has anyone changed name this year, or is it that you can think of, or is it largely ticking along?
There have been some changes. So Mosaic, which have been around for a little while, are now called Gint. So that's changed the last 6 months. There's been some purchases as well. So Lumaps has bought Beekeeper. AppSpace has bought Igloo. So there have been some shifts in the market in the last year. And actually, there's been some investments as well. So Powell, Oak, and Interact have all had quite large investments this year, which I think kind of bodes well for the development of the industry as a whole. So I think allowing them to develop and expand maybe their functionality and inspire the rest of the industry could be quite a positive thing. But also, I suppose an elephant in the room is what we call our report and what all of these different vendors call their platforms, because I think most people probably on the call today probably would agree that intranets is the most common thing that we call these platforms. We certainly know that when we've done research into what to call these products, it's what people most commonly search for when they're looking for something new on Google. And so intranet still is kind of the most appropriate term, I think, for these tools. But employee experience is that kind of concept of what an intranet should be delivering, and is where a lot of vendors are spending their time in marketing their platforms, try and make them sound more contemporary than intranet does, which has been around now for 30 or so years.
You just reminded me of the debates that I used to have several years ago now with a company I was working with, and it was digital workspace or digital workplace.
Mm.
Like intranet's digital workplace, employee experience platform. What do the different terms are there? Like you just touched on it where you were describing it, but are there any kind of key definitions of what they all mean?
So for us at ClearBox, we refer to the entire suite of applications that you use in your day-to-day life as the digital workplace, or digital landscape potentially. So that's everything from a payroll system to whatever you use for your emails, and kind of everything in between, and anything that you may touch on in your day-to-day, but perhaps even is only used by you, your department, your area of the business. It isn't used more broadly, but it's still important in that digital workplace and that digital landscape. And so we have never really called at all a digital workplace. There is the capacity now, I think, with the range of functionality on offer for these intranets, for the platforms that we've been reviewing recently, to offer that kind of front door experience into the digital workplace, which is a concept that's been around for a long time. But there is that potential, I think, now more so than perhaps the last few years, to allow intranets to really deliver on that experience as the technology has evolved, and it's now possible for them to be a front door, but not the whole thing themselves.
Did you nearly say the words one-stop shop?
Oh. No, because I think that concept has been disproven because people work in the tools that they work in. And so for me personally, for example, I use Teams a lot. It's how us at ClearBox, how we collaborate a lot together, both internally and with our clients too, and with our reviewers. So I wouldn't go into an intranet to then open Microsoft Teams, with the internet being that concept of a one-stop shop. It just doesn't quite work because you go where you're going to go. I think that concept of simplifying the things that you maybe don't use very often, or you don't necessarily know where something is, like a payroll system, with that concept of agentic AI, and the kind of workflow processes behind saying, I want to claim some expenses, I want to book some time off, I need to book or register a ticket for this system that's broken. You don't necessarily care as an employee where you're going to do that, as long as it gets done and it's done easily. And so the intranet being a facilitator of those things, I think, is a lot more possible, primarily because intranets are just there to improve day-to-day lives and improve communications, and help with collaboration, surface things, reference materials, storage, that kind of stuff. It doesn't have to be a payroll system as well. It's not the store of where people data is. It's not trying to do other kind of IT-based tools or IT-based services. And so intranets have that neutrality to allow them then to be that front door, and to be that experience layer on top of a digital workplace, potentially, to kind of then dip down into other tools and make it easier.
Okay. So thinking about just taking a step back to the trends in this year's report, I know the last couple of years vendors have been talking about AI, and here is a new smart search that will help surface everything that you've ever saved. Um, are you are there any examples of where AI's been, you've seen any really good deployments and also or features in the products? And the flip side, I know ClearBox are famously vendor neutral. Are there any things that you've seen, either specifically naming them or generally, where things really aren't working?
Mhm. So search is where we've seen the most development, I would say, in the last year to 18 months. When we launched the 2025 edition of the report this time last year, we were just seeing search functionality coming in, where there's that kind of Google type experience now, where you get that AI generated answer based on all of the materials that you have access to. That was just starting to appear, and is now a lot more common. But something that we've uncovered whilst doing this is actually some of the vendors that we've spoken to have been very canny with the way that they present their AI features, and particularly around search. And we discovered that not all AI searches respect permissions, so the results aren't necessarily security trimmed. And so whilst you have this amazing experience that delivers this AI generated answer, you're potentially doing that for either the entirety of your intranet, because it's just bypassing all of those permissions that you'd want to apply, or it's going to have to be pointed at very specific repositories, which for smaller organizations is probably fine. But if you're a larger organization, or if you've done a lot of work with, say, having managers' guides to particular situations like parental leave, for example, if you have a manager's guide that supports that, then actually a manager searching for anything to do with parental leave only being surfaced the employee stuff might get confused and won't have all of the information they need to then do their next the bits they're responsible for. And so there's been little bits and pieces like that actually seem to have been we've uncovered as we've been going through this process, and also the cost of AI as well. So there's a mixed bag with the way that vendors are approaching that as well. So on the whole, a lot of AI functionality, the cost behind actually doing anything that's AI generated in the background is being absorbed as part of the standard licensing costs. But then some vendors have said, oh, if AI usage is particularly high, or if you use AI to do your translations and you do a lot of translations, then that could cause there to be additional costs that you may be exposed to. And I think there's just bits and pieces like that perhaps we as an industry don't necessarily know yet to ask for, but I'm hoping that the report this year will allow people to realise maybe what's not being presented fully in demonstrations, in conversations with vendors, and this will be a way to ask for when you're having a demo of those conversations.
Yeah, no, that does make a lot of sense. I remember seeing a demo from a vendor a couple of years ago, and it's that age-old thing that hasn't changed from when we used to get demos for search on non-AI based intranets, that, but it won't give you good results until the content and the data's in there. But actually, with this AI search, it was giving you results and they were just completely irrelevant, generic answers.
Yeah.
And I think if you were trying to actually contextualize it to your organization, using a large language model isn't going to do that. So it's quite interesting seeing how these things are evolving. But yeah,
I'm just going to add a small thing as well with the search in particular, is whether an AI will hallucinate or not. So some vendors do have things in place where they try to stop their AI from hallucinating, and it will say, I don't know the answer, or I know some vendors are trying to evolve a I don't know, but here's who you can go and ask about this particular thing, as the way to stop that hallucination. But some of them do. And I mean, in the demos, I've seen it happen where someone's done a search while they're doing a demo and it then does spit out an answer. It's like, oh, no, you've just done a search about ClearBox and I know that what you've just come up with is wrong. So yeah, that's not a good thing.
And on search, then, we've had a question come in which feels like it'd be quite timely to ask. Where's it gone? The question panel's zooming past. We're getting them in. Thanks, everyone.
Oh yeah, I've just seen them come in. Oh, blimey.
Yeah, for an out-of-the-box SharePoint intranet. This is from James Broadhurst, by the way. So thanks, James. Do you have any recommendations for how to go about improving the information architecture so that the search brings back more relevant results?
So if you're looking at traditional search, let's call it, there's not necessarily anything in the information architecture that will impact it beyond making sure you've got some good keywords in the title of your page, your document, and making sure that you maintain the age of the content, essentially. So making sure that you keep it fresh, keep it updated, remove anything that's old, don't add an addendum, which is a separate point to something you already have a page about, refresh the whole thing so that you're not bringing back multiple results in that traditional perspective. Given that a lot of these products that are going down the line of having those AI searches, and SharePoint itself has Copilot, which will then interrogate various repositories, it is understanding that scope. So knowing whether your AI search is looking at absolutely everything, if it respects those permissions, or if you are narrowing it down, if you're creating, say, an HR chat interface for HR specific content, or if you've got something more broad, you need to decide how you want that to work and how it works with the technology you have. And then my understanding is that AI search likes Q&A formats. So you've probably noticed when you're using Google that Reddit has always performed very well in search results, but it's performing even better now in that age of AI, because you're asking a natural language question. It then matches very well with Reddit, and the same with intranets. And so there's a Wedge and my colleague Wedge, who's very passionate about content and readability for employees. We've talked about this a few times, where there's that tricky kind of middle ground of, you want to have a page that works well for your employees so that they can go and find a page and read what they need to, and you can maintain it and make sure it's accurate, whilst at the same time an AI search will respond really well to a Q&A format. So they're doing a blend of that, maybe where you do know there are genuinely frequently asked questions, although I hate that as you got a brand new document or a brand new page and everything's an FAQ, because that's not how all these things work. But that Q&A format can be quite powerful for search now.
I got into a bit of a debate about this online the other day as well, because I do appreciate what you were saying about the natural language questions. And my approach with Q&A tends to be, or FAQs, is making sure that we might start off with an FAQs document. It's like, well, what are the questions, or what are the key things that people need to know about this subject? And making sure that those questions are answered in the content, rather than here's a little bit of content and then here's lots of different pages that answer all of these. Whether it's an actual expanded question and answers, or whether it's a page that people can easily scan, and you've written your content to answer those questions, and the headings are meaningful headings, so it's very easy to be able to scan. And then you can get rid of that separate document, because you've answered all the questions. You've got nice, meaningful semantic headings that work really well from everyone's busy point of view. They help people with screen readers skip through to what they need to. I'm more of the opinion of trying to keep all of the content in context, rather than sending people off to separate areas. If this is something that everyone needs to know, it shouldn't be on a supplementary guide that's in a PDF that's in a library that no one knows how to find.
I agree. And I think there are probably some departments, I would say, which are maybe a bit more verbose when they come to write their policies and their guidance materials, through believing it's needed for compliance issues, kind of legal issues. But actually, you don't have to write in legalese to make something legally compliant. And actually, if someone wants to write masses and masses, and you can summarize it in a much clearer, friendlier way, then I think there's a benefit of doing that, and making sure that it's clarified on screen in that way. And of course, with that Q&A format, is you don't necessarily need to launch with a Q&A either. You can use search analytics, of which some platforms have a good amount, others are maybe a little bit further behind, but having that data to see what people are actually looking for, the prompts that people are putting into the AI search to return something, perhaps then if you can look at that and think, well, actually, I don't know that's going to be that easy to find. So maybe this is now a way for us to genuinely create FAQs, because we can see that people are frequently asking them.
Yeah, lovely. I think also what you touched on there, which, just going back to the question about the information architecture, there's something about that search scope A lot of the time when people go to the all Microsoft 365 search, you get absolutely everything that comes back.
Yeah.
And making sure that there's a really clear signpost to the search box that searches just what's in your intranet,
Yes.
and
Yes, that's a
sorting out
fair
that
point.
search scope will help. Because I think, interestingly, when I've sat with users, I mean, nobody actually uses anything like you expect them to, but it's interesting seeing where people actually go to try and find that information. And a lot of the time, they don't go to the very clearly, the very nicely scoped intranet search, because they just go to the box at the top of the screen because that's where they're used to going to. So
Mm.
I think that it's setting that scope so it only looks at the important stuff and isn't pulling out everything in your OneDrive unless you want it to, can also
Yeah.
help.
Yeah, particularly as there's that experience where people don't realize it is looking for everything, and then they think, oh no, how has my OneDrive content ended up being surfaced on the internet? And then people panic that, yeah, it's looking too far. So search, I think, is one of those areas that can make or break the success of an intranet, and deserves more time from an admin content owner perspective, as well as then training people so that they know how their platform works properly.
Yeah, the training side of it is, it's so important with any project, isn't it? But
Mm.
right, we've had another question in that the most upvoted question at the moment. Oh, there's two. We've touched on one just now. The next most upvoted one is from Chris Collins, who says, "Hello, any thoughts around how Microsoft are approaching Copilot licensing and the sheer cost for a large organization to enable SharePoint Copilot? We are really struggling with it. And on the back of that, what's the best example of a custom Copilot SharePoint agent that you've seen? And what does it do?"
So Copilot is very expensive, um, particularly when you consider that there are inner box products and independent internet products that are nothing to do with SharePoint that have their own kind of equivalents. And their licensing costs haven't increased that much, but that's right now. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 6 months to a year as these bits of functionality become more popular. But Copilot is expensive. I believe that Microsoft are looking into their pricing and are going to try and decrease it. But given that it's expensive to do anything AI related, from that vendor perspective, I don't know how much they can reduce the cost by, because of the cost in data center and the amount of water and power that's needed to do one query, is going to keep those costs high until that technology improves. In terms of a kind of more bespoke thing, that there are SharePoint Internet in a Box platforms that have their own equivalent. So PAL, for example, which I mentioned earlier on, they have individual scoped AI searches and kind of assistance per area of your intranet and per third party digital tool. So if you wanted to say have something for Workday, or if you wanted to have something for your HR section, then you could configure something that would then work specifically with that. And those then reduce that cost of the broader AI usage, because they are kind of scoping it much more and reducing the cost down. So I think probably SharePoint Internet in a Box products are doing slightly cheaper things with AI, whilst also allowing you to plug Copilot in if you've made that investment. But it is expensive.
Gosh, yeah. The frustration that I found when I've been experimenting with Copilot, there are some things it does reasonably well and some things that it seems to be appalling at compared to other LLMs on the market. Like,
Mm,
on a positive note, it's in your Azure tenant and you're not sending off your company's proprietary information off to goodness knows where.
mm,
Um, but for me, one of the big limitations for the kind of work that I've done with clients is that if you want to try and summarize a bigger document, and by bigger, I mean more than about 1,200 words, we're not talking about a book here. If you're trying to help pull out content from really dense PDFs and show it on the content on the actual pages on your intranet, like, it can do a really good job of taking something that's been well designed but actually isn't very accessible. So there's something that is following that's got a logical order, but actually none of the headings are meaningful, and the colours are all off. I found that it's been quite good. You can sort of put your PDF up into Copilot and ask it to format you a page that would work well on SharePoint, and it's like, if you give it a prompt and say, give it meaningful headings, that means people can scan it and it's easy to find. And summarize the key information. If the starter document isn't too long or has too many tokens, so whether that's images or whatever that document's made up from, it's quite good. But I was doing some work with an organisation, and there was like an 8-page document which was their guidance for staff on uniforms. It's like, I want to pull out this information onto onto a page about uniforms, and it just stops. It shortens rather than summarizing. Like, it from a distance it looks legit, and then when I looked up close, so a paragraph from the last page of this, not very wordy but an 8-page document, it didn't say what you needed to do to make sure that uniform was securely destroyed. It just said secured uniform destruction. Like, it doesn't, it shortens rather than summarising, which is quite frustrating. And I can see why some organisations are really struggling to justify it. And at the same time, it can do some things really well.
Yeah, so I used Copilot out of interest to summarise parts of the SharePoint review that we've written, because I was just like fiddling around with it, basically. So copying and pasting in, say, about 1,000 words again per scenario for SharePoint, and asked it to summarize it into a couple of paragraphs. And it will precisely do that, but it isn't smart enough, and it probably isn't just Copilot, it's probably others as well. It's just not smart enough to say, well, you've asked for 2 paragraphs, but for me to do that, I'm going to be padding and repeating myself. So rather than 2 concise, good paragraphs, which is a summary of what has been put in, it's like fluffed some of it out a little bit, and it's like, I don't necessarily want that, but it's useful to see. But then where Copilot's also been good, so what I did something in Power Automate, and having Copilot there for me to say, what does this mean? I am not technically minded to that extent. I don't know what this error message mean. What does it mean? And for it to tell me was incredibly valuable. But then saying, okay, well, I'm trying to do this thing. What do I need to put in the code to make this particular activity happen? And then for it to not work and me to ask again, it gave me a slight variation, then realize, no, it is just hallucinating, and the thing I'm asking it to do, it's not possible. But Copilot won't tell you that, it will just hallucinate. And I think Microsoft should think very, very carefully about that hallucination side, because people are going to be relying on Copilot. I mean, we've had something, the UK news recently with the police chief whose team used Copilot to find a particular evidence of a particular football team being problematic, and therefore justified in being banned from coming to the UK, their fans coming to the UK and supporting a match, and they used Copilot, and Copilot hallucinated something, and it went in this report, and there's been all sorts of fallout from it. And I think Microsoft, possibly over and above any other AI tool, should not allow for hallucinations, personally speaking.
Yeah, yeah. This links quite nicely into a question from Lydia, which you might have just answered already, but what's the most underrated skill or capability an internal comms or intranet team should have in 2026 or 2026? Maybe that's the first time I've said that out loud. 2026, not 2026. That's not right.
So I think ever since AI has come around and the ability to edit and to recognize what's in front of you as not being quite right and knowing how to fix it, and being able to share that with your contributor. I now can't say it, contributors, and the decentralized model, if you have that, and going out and working with them and allowing them to understand how to use AI if they're using it for generative purposes for intranet content and internal comms. But I think there's probably a robustness that's still needed. I think something that we've noticed is that I think just gesturing at the world, there is a lot going on right now. Global politics is interesting. We are living in interesting times. We thought that COVID probably was going to be one of the hardest things we lived through, but I think this period is challenging in a different way. And there are reduced budgets, and organisations are being more careful about where they're spending because we don't know what's going to happen in the next few months and years. And so I think a robustness and an understanding of what you can achieve with what you have, and knowing maybe where your gaps are in the functionality that you have, and what you want to achieve, and a very clear strategy. I think strategy now is almost more important than ever. It's always been important, but you need to know what you're aiming to do as a business, and how what you're doing as an internal communicator and with your intranet as well, how that then aligns and supports all of those things, so that you can continue to support the business and continue to prove how you're bringing that value to the business as well. What do you think, as well as you've seen other organisations and had experiences in different ways? What do you think is an important skill?
I think you hit the nail on the head there when you said about being able to recognise when you've got slop in front of you. I feel like we're now in a time where if something's really well formatted when it arrives on my desk, I'm more suspicious of it than if it's someone's initial vomit that's come out of their brain.
Yeah.
It's frustrating because all of the signs of good accessible content, using paragraphs, using meaningful headings, breaking things down into bullets, using shorter sentences, LLMs are really good at doing that. And
Mm.
so the problem is you get presented with something and you think, oh, yeah, that's great. I'll send that out. And you're like, hang on a minute. No, it's not actually said anything. There's something completely wrong in here. Or, I remember I was using a digital whiteboard and got an LLM to help transcribe some stuff for me, or so I thought, because I thought this is exactly the kind of grunty work that I don't want to be exporting and either taking this CSV out of Miro or having to manually copy and paste it. Surely this is the sort of thing that something like Claude could do. And it did, but it also filled in gaps, made jumps in logic, and also corrected some names of things that weren't spelt the standard way.
Oh.
So there's that kind of built-in inherent bias. It's been these tools have been taught on the massively biased fundamental issues that exist with all of the data that's ever existed online, and it can amplify it in ways that you don't necessarily realize.
Yeah.
So I think understanding the limitations and being able to spot those, um and also just see through some of the terrible sales pitches of unrealistic things, but
Mm.
trying to get enough trying to learn enough about it to know
Mm.
what you need to know more about, and what you can just say, no, we're not doing that. Because I
Mm.
think I know lots of people still, not the majority now actually from recent events I've been to, but there are still lots of people who have dug down deep and said, I'm not touching it. But in the workplaces that we're in at the moment, I think there's something about increasing your understanding of it, even if it is just to
Mm.
justify why you're not touching it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
but
I think
yeah.
that's fair. I think actually something that's worth kind of linking to something you just said is when I so doing all the reviews and I kind of focus on each one as I'm editing and helping reviewers. And then at the end, I come back and look through everything to write the introduction and the outro, which has got all the trends and all the findings in. And my impression, and from having seen a lot of the marketing stuff that vendors put out and the conversations that happen, is that I was going to be writing a lot about agentic AI and that kind of chat interface where you work in the intranet and then it goes out to all the different tools and you're able to do loads of stuff and it's all going to feed it back in. I was expecting that to be one of the big things that I talked about. And when I looked back, I was like, oh, actually, it doesn't really exist yet. Even where there is some, it's limited, or by perhaps it having to be a particular repository, or there's a limited number of APIs available to integrate. It's not as broad reaching as I think the industry is making this sound. And I think there's a risk around all of this AI stuff, around what's being talked about versus the reality of what's there, and then versus the reality of how you, across everybody who's here, and how you use it and how your organization uses it. And there's all of this stuff that comes together in this big melting pot, and nothing is quite as rosy as I think it seems. I think there's so much complexity around it, and embrace that complexity and just understand it for your perspective, your organization, and then tackle things as they come.
Yeah, okay. So let's take a step back from, well, it might be, the answer might be AI, but a question that's also been asked in the chat. Working in a mostly Microsoft served organization, do you see anything interesting on the Microsoft roadmap that is of interest to the internal comms community? And that's from Tony Cox. Thank you, Tony.
Roadmap, so Microsoft have always been very good at talking about what they've got planned and then not necessarily delivering it. So if we turn back to pre-ChatGPT and post-COVID, there was that little window where Microsoft announced Viva, the Viva suite, which was going to replace absolutely everything that happened in digital workplaces. It was going to replace every digital tool you had, because there was going to be a Viva tool that would do something that would replace learning or whatever else it might be. And they announced Viva Amplify as part of that, which I think is how they have wanted to tackle internal comms features, functionality needs. But the reality right now is the functionality on offer, even if you combined SharePoint with Viva Amplify and a few other tools that are there, you're still going to be missing off quite a lot of functionality that you get out of the box with other tools. And so, whilst I've not necessarily seen anything concrete from Microsoft, the features and functionality exists, and I'd like to think that they will try and address some of those gaps, so that it's all built into SharePoint and or Viva Amplify if they want to get some more money out of licensing costs, when it's just standard in other tools right now. And I think Microsoft have been a few steps behind for years when it comes to functionality, because there have been so many products, both in a box and independent intranets and other tools, that have gone, oh, SharePoint is still not brilliant at mobile experience. So frontline workers, if you've got a huge frontline workforce right now, you probably will need something else to reach them, because the Microsoft ecosystem just won't be brilliant at doing that. Yes, you can use Teams. Yes, you can use Viva connections. But in terms of understanding that audience and how they want to work, there's a bit of a disconnect there. And I think Microsoft are just kind of constantly trying to catch up with filling those gaps. And I hope that they do, because there are some pretty big gaps for internal comms people, I think.
Would you like to elaborate on what those gaps are?
Yeah. So I think now internal comms people want more than just being able to create nice looking news stories. I think in days gone by, then that was a big need, because it wasn't a consistent thing. But now things like communications campaigns, so being able to gather together different types of communications underneath a theme to see how well your entire message, your entire theme is performing, not just the individual bits underneath it. So that kind of campaign concept isn't common in the industry, certainly isn't something that SharePoint by itself self addresses. But then also being able to create something once and then have that one thing go to lots of different channels. So going back to what we were talking about, where that one-stop shop kind of concept doesn't work, but having that front door and facilitating, we've got this message that we've published on the intranet, but you're working over here on Teams or you're working in Salesforce. How can we trickle that message through? And it's that kind of omni-channel, multi-channel kind of approach, which SharePoint is not bad for Microsoft applications, not brilliant, surprisingly, but not bad. But outside of that, it either takes a lot of effort to get it set up or it doesn't exist. Whereas again, within the industry, the best in brand, the best of in field are just doing that sort of stuff out of the box.
Mm. Yeah, that's fair. I feel like that docks nicely into a question that we've had from Charlotte Martin, sorry. In your experience, do you recommend using Viva Engage with SharePoint intranets for leadership team communications in order to hear an authentic voice from leaders? Alternatively, are straightforward SharePoint news posts from the company/leadership team effective enough in order to reach an internal audience of a small to medium company size? And there's a last question on that. What measurement tools at the back end of SharePoint would you recommend using? Are there some easy to use dashboards, and how reliable, how much insight does the data give?
So I think you absolutely can use Viva Engage and SharePoint, or you could absolutely use SharePoint by itself. I think the biggest thing is it depends on your leaders and it depends on the culture of your organization. If you have a very chatty, engaging leader who is quite active, say on LinkedIn, who would be quite happy to kind of replicate what they're doing there, or is quite happy to go out on, say, a site visit and wander around and take photos with people and do like little posts and updates and share messages in that way and kind of reinforce some of the strategic stuff in that way, then I would say brilliant, go for it. If they're very keen on doing that, but your organization is, say, very controlled and people are nervous about speaking up, then your leader may be speaking into the void and not have anybody engage with them. And so I would look at that first to see whether that would marry up together and fit together well. Then you can use SharePoint by itself. You could have a specific type of update. Don't just call them a message from the CEO, because you'll end up with a million of them and no one ever be able to find them in search because they're all called the same thing. But they could be themed as that. They could be tagged as that, or have a particular like little roundel in the image or something along those lines to make them stand out as being something along those lines, and almost have it like a blog to complement anything that's more formal, be in a particular space on the intranet homepage and reinforced in that way. And in terms of analytics, so there are dedicated tools. Swoop obviously is a big name in the industry, and I think Lisa, you'll agree there it's pretty good in terms of analysing SharePoint and other Microsoft tool activities. But then there are things like tyGraph and even Power BI if you want to do the configuration that you can get that set up to do what you want. And when it comes to something along these lines, where it's messages from leaders, you don't necessarily just want to be looking at the stats on your intranet. You're looking at other measures. So if you're trying to roll out a new product, it's around how many questions do you get about it. You perhaps don't, if you reduce the number of questions you normally would have about a new product launch, then perhaps you're giving enough information up front that people don't feel the need to ask a question, and those sorts of things as well. So I would challenge you to think about other questions that aren't necessarily intranet stat related that you can ask to then answer with kind of the data that you have on hand.
Lovely. Gosh, we've had some really brilliant questions in so far. I'm conscious that we're getting to the end of our hour. We've still got 10 minutes left to go, but we will be answering the questions that have been asked. If we don't manage it in the next 10 minutes, you'll be sending out a follow-up with answers, won't you?
Yes, I think, yeah, we may very well do a little post to answer some of the questions.
Yeah. So what you would what Charlotte's question echoed a question that came in before someone filled out the form online, and I feel like it's a very similar question. So we might have already answered it, but it also touches on governance a bit. And it's
Mm,
how does a collaborative intranet architecture where departments create their own content and then it comes up and is surfaced on the main intranet, how does the adoption on that compare to something that's tightly controlled with maybe more features?
mm.
Um, and is a middle ground approach even worth it?
So again, it depends. I mean, it depends is a classic consultant answer, but it depends a little bit on how you have set up yourself as an organization, maybe what you've inherited if you're new into that role and looking after the internet. Um, Previously in roles that I've had, I've worked where me and my team were responsible for the entire intranet, and we would work with departments and we would create content and upload it and manage it and be that kind of facilitator. But also in previous roles, I've worked where that wasn't possible, and I've worked with different departments to create their own content and to kind of generate their own materials and look after their own spaces. And governance really is key there. So you need someone to take that position of control over the architecture, over who is going to be looking after certain parts of the internet and making sure that happens. But you can then give that control of what's there to the relevant departments and work with them to build it. I wouldn't necessarily just let them go gung ho and have no oversight and leave them to create their own templates and break accessibility standards and use terrible tone of voice compared with everything else and apply their own branding because they're their own department that deserves it compared with everything else. For all of those reasons, I wouldn't just let them go ahead by themselves, but there is a scale of how much involvement you could and should have, and that's kind of dependent on how you want to run it as an organization, and as a team of people who potentially would have that ultimate say, but keeping the end user experience in mind is the most important thing, and documenting all of that as part of governance documentation and guidance is important.
Yeah, I've definitely seen it work both ways. In the same organization, even you see there's like this glorious cycle of the internet's gone to the Wild West and it's all gone to chaos. We must take control back in socially. And then it's like it takes too long to get any updates made on the internet because the central team's not got enough resources. We must distribute out and train up a set of content owners. And it's that
Mm,
kind of flip of centralized, decentralized, centralized, that kind of depending on the size of your organization and who's
mm,
in charge,
mm.
seems to vary every few years. It might flip from one to the other.
Yeah, and that's where something like Viva Engage or something similar that's kind of that community type space can be really valuable so that then you keep a light touch ongoing control as an internet management team without necessarily having to do things yourself, but you can do things like regular tips or like little training videos that just drop in, and if someone's leaving, hopefully they'll say goodbye and then you be introduced to the new person that takes over at the same time, and actually moving to a digital community can be pretty valuable in that situation.
Right. That's also very similar to a question that we got from Ethan. It might be Ethan. I don't know if it's the same person that sent it in before. Building out an intranet in SharePoint in a mid-sized, around 200 employee business this year. From an adoption standpoint, during an intranet's initial rollout, which first impression tends to work better? Lots to explore but little to create, news events pages, or lots to create but little to explore? In your experience, is there a middle ground that gets that early adoption?
I think if you have refreshed your intranet and you had something that was very static and not very engaging, then you could overwhelm people by having loads to create, and having loads of things to then go and do. I would say doing gradual launches of things if you are planning to bring in a lot of two-way sort of activities, then doing it in phases and launching each one and reinforcing the value of it, then launch the next thing and reinforce the value of that is probably the better way to go with that. But if you are redoing your intranet, I would hope you would have that strategy. And as part of the strategy, you would know what it is your employees want from your intranet. And the things that they want the most should be the thing that is absolutely there from day one. So think about a healthcare client we worked with relatively recently. They had an issue where people relied on their existing intranet for finding medical forms, and medical forms had to be kept there because they actually changed quite frequently, and so they couldn't be saved locally, they had to be saved there. But they, in the current intranet, they were all named weird things like MTCZ.4, that kind of thing. And so how people found, but they knew what it was for, but the search wouldn't really help them because it prioritized that code. But that was so valuable to them. So that's what you need to focus on getting right for the day one. And then if you've got lovely communities and nice events for people to sign up for and all those other things, hopefully it will lead to them taking part in that, because the core functionality, the core thing they want, works so well, they're happy to go away and explore and look at other things and engage with your platform beyond that stuff that they just want for their day-to-day lives.
I love that. Sometimes that thing is the canteen menu. Remember when we all used to work in big offices? They do still exist, and canteens do still exist, but make sure that that key content is there, isn't it?
Yeah.
So there was one question. Can we do it very quickly?
Yes.
What are the top pages of content that you want to see? You've almost answered it there already. Oh, I've lost it. It's bounced around. Where's it gone? I'm paraphrasing from what I read. Yeah, what's the top? What would be the top things you'd put on an intranet?
Oh God, top things I would put on an intranet. Oh God, that's a really hard question. As always, it depends. Yay, consultant. But I think it is that thing. It is whatever your employees want the most. Look at any research you've done, whether that be formalized surveys or just where you've seen people moaning on Viva Engage or other things. Go along to meetings, get 10 minutes at the end, ask for people just to unload at what the things that frustrate them, the stats that you have, all of those things will give you that this is what is important to our people. And then that is the content that I would prioritize. When I was working on redoing the Waterstones intranet, for example, which is, it's a while ago now, but when I was doing that, we knew that the health and safety content was a little bit light on the ground, but it was at a time where there were a lot more health and safety incidents that were kind of coming up, and where we realised that there were quite significant pages missing that were quite important. So like what to do in the event of a bomb threat and broader kind of situation was very light touch with what was there. And I was like, in the event that this is needed, this is vital. And so we prioritized getting some of that rewritten and actually having that, even though it wasn't used frequently, the importance of it to the shop community was so high that it was worthwhile spending that time on doing it. So I would look at that as well, with maybe where are the gaps that you have right now, and then what you think will be most valuable for people, and go down that route.
Lovely. We have got to time. My last question is, when's the report coming out, Suzie?
The report hopefully will be out next week. There has been a slight hiccup with the design tool for our designer, which has stalled us slightly, but all being well, next week, and we'll let everybody know who's on this call that it's out once it's out.
Fantastic. Thanks all for staying so long with us.
Thank you.
And yeah,
we will
you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, we will share the recording with you the next couple of days. We will share any questions and answers that we've not been able to get to, hopefully all being well. So yeah, keep an eye out for other content on this, and we will let you know when the next one of these happens.